Good afternoon. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President of World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Our program today is Canada and the U.S. Friends, Partners, and Allies, a conversation with Kirsten Hillman, Ambassador of Canada to the United States. This program is a joint program with the World Affairs Councils of America, our umbrella organization, and it's part of the WACA's Embassy Row Live series of program. And I want to welcome people from World Affairs Councils across the U.S. I saw people had registered from Alaska, Charlotte, Naples, South Texas, Tennessee. And I want to welcome Bill Clifford, the CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America. Give a special welcome to Nico Weinberg, who's the Chief of Protocol in the state of Georgia, to Gordon Giffen, former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Dr. Jagdish Sheth and Sam Olens, who are my bosses on my board of directors. We've got former speakers, Capricia Marshall, Signe Schneider, Marianne Peters. Somebody just told me that Jim Reed on our board of directors just turned up, so welcome, Jim. And I want to welcome some old friends, Mauro Ravello, a Venezuelan friend who lives in Toronto, and Irene Filippi from the World Bank, who are joining our programs for the first time. Today's program is underwritten by the Consulate General of Canada to the Southeastern United States and by Invest Canada. To ask questions, and we'll have questions from the audience, please use the Q&A function. There's a link at the bottom of the screen, of your Zoom screen. Don't use chat. Keep your questions short, and please don't ask them anonymously or I won't read them. Ambassador Louise Blais is the acting Consul General of Canada in the Southeastern US and a very close personal friend. And Louise is going to introduce Ambassador Hillman. Over to you, Louise.
Merci, cher Ambassador Shapiro. What a pleasure it is for me to be with you today. And on behalf of all of my colleagues, really have to tell you just how appreciative we are of the partnership that we have with the World Affairs Council here in the Southeast. We think that you bring us into vital conversations and we're really, really honored to have been a great partner to the organization through the years. And I have to say that your invitation to Ambassador Hillman, which makes me very proud to welcome her virtually into the Southeast, that will be a conversation on the Canada-US relationship, and it is absolutely timely. And I think it just goes to show that there's so much interest in it, and there should be, because giving the relatively new Biden administration and the roadmap that we now have with the United States that our Prime Minister has also helped co-create, this roadmap will take us out of the pandemic and will charter our way into the next few years as we all recover and we tackle climate change together. And indeed, there are two nations that depend on each other for their mutual prosperity and security more than Canada and the US. And I know Ambassador Hillman will touch on that. So I will not spend any more time talking about this great relationship and leave that to her, but it is indeed an honor for me to introduce her today. She is an amazing colleague. Ambassador Hillman was, I think it was 2 years ago, she became the very first woman ambassador to the US from Canada. And she lifted all of us up in pride. And she was, before her appointment, she was instrumental in the renegotiation of the USMCA. So it's totally fitting that she'd be there for the implementation of this incredible trade pact. And little footnote here, she and I met actually in Atlanta, which is interesting because she was down here for the last round. She had been our chief negotiation for the then called TPP pact, and the last round was in Atlanta, where it was finalized and initially signed. And so she was with us. I think it was about for 2 weeks of hard negotiation near the end and the announcement. And so that's how we became acquainted with each other, and we stayed friends ever since. So let me just say just a few words about her incredible career prior to all of that. She spent 25 years in the government of Canada to date. She also served as senior trade counsel and served as senior legal advisor. And she was at the permanent mission of Canada to the WTO in Geneva. So you want to talk trade policy, there's no one better than Ambassador Hillman. But before joining Global Affairs, she also worked practicing law in Montreal and at the Department of Justice in Ottawa. So Ambassador Hillman grew up in Calgary and in Winnipeg, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts from University of Manitoba and a Bachelor of Civil Law, as well as Bachelors of Common Law from McGill University, my alma mater. I'm proud to have her as a colleague, as I mentioned, and I'm extremely lucky to count her as a friend. So please join me in giving her a very, very warm welcome. Bienvenue, chère Kirsten.
Ambassador Hillman, welcome. What a great intro. Thank you, Louise. I appreciate that. That's great. Welcome to the World Affairs Council. It's great having you here. What's it like personally to be the ambassador of Canada to the United States? I mean, we're such close allies. We're each other's best trading partner. What's that like for you personally?
Well, I will be very excited to tell you that, but first let me say thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to you, Ambassador Shapiro. Merci beaucoup, Louise, pour cette introduction très gentille, très émouvante. Thank you, and I'm really happy to be with you. I'm looking forward to this event. So what's it like to be Canada's ambassador to the United States? I mean, that's a big question. It's a big job. I'll say that. It's our most important relationship, and therefore it is an enormous honor, and it's an enormous privilege, and it's an enormous responsibility to be able to oversee a relationship that is so multifaceted, not just between our federal governments, right? Not just between the White House and the Prime Minister's office, but our entire cabinet, our entire federal system, but all of our states and local governments, our businesses, our academics, our scientists, our law enforcement, our military. One of the things that I really have come to understand living here in the US that I kind of knew intellectually but hadn't lived before was how Canadians and Americans have literally, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands interactions every day. And those are, they're travelers, they're students, they're, as I say, our law enforcement, our intelligence communities, our military, our businesses, our teachers, think of any walk of life, and there are Canadians and Americans dealing together in that area. And the relationship between governments is essential and important and drives a lot of our common policy. But it's actually those relationships between all the people that are kind of the fabric on which we stand. And I see that every single day. So that's the context. The context is that I have the great privilege to represent my Prime Minister and my country in a relationship that means very much to us in so many ways every single day. On a day-to-day, as you would know, Ambassador, I mean, there's no one day that's the same as the one before, right? We can be dealing with a foreign policy matter. We could be dealing with a local, challenge. Oftentimes, the Canada-US, and I noticed this is something that I think distinguishes me a lot from many of the ambassador colleagues here in town. A lot of what we talk about is very domestic policy. It's very local policy. So we talk about our transportation ministers are in touch, right? Our environment ministers are in touch, but yes, they're talking about environmental objectives on the global stage, but they're also talking about the Great Lakes or shared waterways or flooding or invasive species. Our energy ministers are talking about transboundary energy issues. Our police services are talking about challenges with homegrown domestic terrorism, right? Which is, unfortunately, something we share. Or the opioids crisis, which is something we share with our public safety minister is going to be, would be talking about. Or our land border. Goodness knows our land border has gotten a lot of attention in the last 16 months. So it's a very domestically oriented job as well, which makes it terrific because I get to build relationships across the entire, not only US government, but actually across the whole country, because these issues are relevant. Like in Florida, we talk about, obviously a lot of the tourism and issues that we have so many Canadians that spend an awful lot of time in Florida. So the realities of what we talk about there are particular to that aspect of our relationship. So to sum up, it's a privilege, it's a delight, it's multifaceted, always rewarding, and I can't think of a better job, frankly.
I can't either. And I think you've got the best post in the Canadian Foreign Service. So congratulations to you. What do we need to do to get, I mean, I'm going to talk on trade a little bit since you spent so much of your career working on trade issues, and I assume you still are. How do we, is U.S. Canada trade back to pre-pandemic levels? And if not, what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, so in the early stages of the pandemic, which I think is not surprising, we had a bit of a lull in our bilateral goods trade in particular, but that has actually recouped itself to the point of we are now back to about, and it was just a bit, we went down to about 85%. It depended, like, week on week, month on month, but we were hovering around 80-85%. Sometimes it was 100%, sometimes it was a little less, but on average for the early part of the pandemic, the first several, like maybe 6 to 8 months, there was a drop. But actually, as of last month, bilateral trade flows were back up to 95% of pre-pandemic levels, which is fantastic. And I think it's a testament, frankly, it's a testament to the integrated supply chains, but it's a testament to something that became so obvious during the pandemic, which was our efforts to, constrain non-essential travel between our two countries were designed very specifically to also ensure the continued free flow of goods back and forth across our borders, so that we would be able to sustain our vital health supply chains, our vital food supply chains, our vital, some national security interests in some respects, but also, frankly, just manufacturing, just to make sure people were able to stay in jobs, to keep our economies as resilient as possible in such an unprecedented time. And that worked well. As I say, even at the worst of times, we were only down by about 15%, and we're heading back up again. So I think that's incredible. And in fact, my notes here tell me that in March of this year, U.S. exports to Canada hit the highest level that they had reached since 2014. So you guys are just back at it with a vengeance. That's what I
Well, what I can do, there's loads of Georgia jobs that depend on our exports to Canada and on Canadian inputs to things being manufactured here and Canadian investment here in Georgia. Earlier this month, we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of what the U.S. calls USMCA and you calls CUSMA. I love that. What have we accomplished in the first year?
That's a terrific question. Just as a little anecdote, in case your viewers are interested, why it's called CUSMA in Canada, USMCA in the United States, and TMEX in Mexico, is because under an international treaty that governs the naming of treaties, countries put their own country name first in the title of a treaty where there are country names listed in the treaty. And so when we had the NAFTA, the reason NAFTA was chosen is because it didn't actually include any of the country names. But then when it was decided to include country names, the 3 countries had to put their own country's name first. So in case anybody, and I've had this question before, this is why I'm trying to clear the record, in case anybody thinks that this differential naming had to do with some kind of, disagreement among the 3 parties, it wasn't that at all. It was that, there was a desire to have the country names listed in the treaty, and therefore, according to international treaty protocols, it had to be listed differently for each country. So that this is not an answer to your question, but just as an anecdote that people might find interesting. So, when it comes to international trade and trade agreements, what matters most to businesses and therefore to workers and therefore, to all the jobs that our businesses are creating, whether they're big businesses or small businesses, what matters is predictability. And the reason that we enter into international trade agreements is essentially twofold. It's to open up markets, to sort of privilege the relationship between the countries that are entering into the treaty together, and to create stability with respect to the rules that are going to govern that trade over time. Specifically, we want that stability so that our companies will feel confident investing in the other jurisdictions, so that they will feel confident in putting the effort in to create these supply chains that create jobs in all, in this case, 3 countries. And it's much easier to do that when they have a sense that there are rules in place that are going to endure, in particular endure, you know, as the domestic situations in the countries evolve. So that's the goal of a treaty. And for the USMCA, it was really, that was really well achieved. It was an incredibly successful agreement, the NAFTA, for all 3 countries. It created millions of jobs, millions and millions of jobs in all 3 countries. And while it did have, there were some adjustments and some challenges faced in certain sectors and regions, overall, it was, the integration of our 3 economies was very beneficial to North America. But the truth was, the agreement was over 20 years old, right? It was drafted in a time when we didn't have an internet. It was drafted in a time when, you know, we were very focused on goods trade, whereas for Canada and US in particular, our economies are now very largely services driven as well as goods driven, but also the services and the services that underpin goods trade. And it really needed some updating. So we succeeded in doing that, I think, in very important ways. There's a digital commerce chapter, which allows to make sure that there's, again, predictability around the rules in terms of using digital trade. There's a chapter that deals with, and this is not very exciting for people, but it's super important for businesses, that deals with the procedures that you have to use at the border when you're doing customs, you know, work between the 3 countries. And that's super important, because the more onerous that is, the more complicated that is, the less digital it is, the less consistent it is, the harder it is for small businesses and medium-sized businesses to take advantage of trade. It's only the big guys and gals that are going to be able to do it if it's complex, because they have the facilities for it. So we did that. And then, of course, there were a lot of really important labor and environment innovations.
Has it worked? Has digital trade increased?
You know, I don't know. I can't answer that question for you right now. My guess is, given in particular the USMCA and the pandemic, probably. But I don't have that data in front of me right now. But what the digital trade chapter in particular is designed to do 2 things, really: to set rules that are consistent between our 3 countries, so that, as I say, the sort of smaller companies that might be more at risk of volatility feel confident, and also to actually protect our citizens' private information and have some standards around data protection. So it's a bit of both is happening.
How does Buy American fit in? I mean, the Biden administration is a big proponent of Buy American, which for the audience is the idea that U.S. government should only purchase U.S.-made goods, even if they cost more than imported goods. How does that work? I mean, I assume Canadian companies providing either finished products or components to U.S. products aren't real happy about that.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for that question. That's a very topical issue right now. And as people may know, there's a lot of work being done on infrastructure legislation, and there's a lot of talk around what kinds of domestic content requirements may or may not be included in that legislation. And, you know, a moment ago, Ambassador, you said that for Georgia exports a large amount of different kinds of manufactured products or inputs to Canada that are then used in the manufacture of other products. And that's actually very indicative of the overall Canada-US goods trade relationship. Well over 60% of what we sell to each other isn't finished goods or raw commodities. It's inputs into the creation of other products. And we have, and there's always, you know, people often talk about the auto sector, where pieces and parts go back and forth 4 or 5 times before a final vehicle is produced. But that's just one manufacturing sector. This exists across our manufacturing sectors. And in our agriculture sector. So the philosophy behind domestic content requirements is that if you require for government purchasing, so government procurement, so when the government is going to purchase goods or services or invest in infrastructure, for example, they will set levels of content in those products that has to be American. Maybe it's 100%, 80%, 70%, but it has to be derived from American sources, and there's calculations that are put in place there. And the theory behind that is that it will create US jobs because it will incentivize US manufacturing and US inputs. So first of all, obviously the policy objective of creating and incentivizing US jobs is completely important, especially now, but always. And Canada seeks to do the same thing. In our policies, we seek to incentivize jobs in Canada. That is our job. And if we weren't doing that, well, that would be a problem. So that's absolutely what we're trying to do. And so the policy per se, or the goal of the policy, we completely agree with. But what we're trying to express to the administration, to members of Congress, is that when you apply that policy to the Canada-US trade relationship, you actually aren't creating jobs. You actually are putting US companies and jobs at risk because these supply chains are so deeply integrated. And especially, you know, these are relationships that are generational, but we also have a lot of symbiosis between the kinds of things that we produce versus the kinds of things that are produced here. So it's more efficient and it's more cost effective and it's more job creating because these relationships are so highly developed. So what we are trying to say is, you know, there are lots of examples where Canada is considered part of the United States for the purposes of industrial policy, for the purposes of defense policy, for the purposes of government purchasing. And this should be the case today as well, because we will find, and we found this in 2009, that if policies are put in place that break those supply chains, then both sides will lose out. They'll lose out on the opportunity to bid. They'll lose out on the goods that they're able to sell. You know, if we go down the road where US imposes buy American, Canada starts to impose buy Canadian, which is very possible because these things are, you know, highly challenging, let's just say. People view these policies in Canada as being inappropriate given the degree of our commercial relationship. So it's conceivable, and our budget would allow for us to impose reciprocal measures. And then Georgia will lose out, right? Because those inputs from Georgia that we would use in products for government procurement can't be used anymore. So there's no reason to do this. It will lead to job losses and challenges for businesses. So I'm spending a lot of time on this, but you've asked an incredibly topical question that we're spending a lot of time talking about. So I would say to you and anyone else who is participating in this session that there can be a Canada-US approach to economic recovery that puts us in the same tent together, where we are incentivizing cooperation, incentivizing increased competitiveness, us against the world, if you will. And that's what we need to find as a solution here so we can get our citizens back to work.
I mean, in essence, we have one industrial economy,
right,
among the three nations of North America. And so to try to pull one out, I mean, it's appealing to voters, but it doesn't make sense in terms of commerce and economics. And I'm going to turn away from trade now for a second. We've been talking about that, and I love it, and we'll stay on trade forever. Let's talk about Haiti for just a minute. I mean, both U.S. and Canada have a large number of Haitian immigrants in our countries. Are we working together? What can we do together to help Haiti get through the crisis it's suffering right now?
That is a shift. That's a shift in topics.
Yeah, abrupt. Yeah.
So the assassination of President Louise was incredibly challenging. It exacerbated, frankly, the already existing challenges, political unrest, you know, economic insecurity, challenges with crime and civil unrest that were already facing Haiti. You know, a new government has just been formed. That is a very good step. There is going to be an agreement. There is an agreement to move forward with an election. Canada and the United States are among the top, among the highest amount of presence in Haiti. For Canada, Haiti is our it depends on the year, but our #1 or our #2 destination for foreign aid. Afghanistan and Haiti and Afghanistan, it kind of just depends on the year. So we're deeply committed to Haiti, but these are very, very difficult problems. So we are, you know, we're working with the United States and the rest of the community, the international community, towards facilitating a process of dialogue that can lead to an election that is inclusive, so that the country can on its own start to develop a path forward. Because I think that we all know that ultimately success is going to have to come from within. It just will. So we're working on that, and we're committed to supporting Haiti through this process with the United States and with other allies.
Okay, I'm gonna make another abrupt change. We are both Arctic nations. And we've been talking about climate change for so long, but it's in northern Canada and northern Alaska, climate change is not something theoretical. It's happening right now. How are we collaborating, and what are the opportunities for US and Canada to collaborate on climate change issues?
Well, that's great. So I think one of the first things I would say is that on climate change more generally, our government and the Biden administration have an enormous alignment in terms of what we want to do internationally, in terms of what we're seeking to do domestically, you know, the electrification of our transportation sector, cutting greenhouse gas emissions in a variety of sectors, including by capping wells, right, and dealing with, I'm not sure the exact technical term, but the escape of methane from wells, which is a huge problem. So there's lots of things that we're doing together on climate in particular. In terms of the Arctic, excuse me, in terms of the Arctic, we've long collaborated with the US bilaterally, and then also in the context of the Arctic Council. More recently, when the President and the Prime Minister in February issued this sort of medium to long-term, what's called a roadmap for Canada-US partnership. It sets out all sorts of categories of activities that we're going to do together. And in there, they have a specific commitment to expand our Arctic dialogue and cooperation to include, obviously, environmental and social development, scientific cooperation, and, you know, continental security. So we are expecting a meeting in that regard fairly early in the fall. It hasn't been set yet, but in the fall. And to your question about Indigenous peoples in particular, let me just speak from the Canadian side. There is obviously a recognition that they are on our globe some of the populations that are most affected by climate change. And in their daily lives, it affects their infrastructure, it affects their economy, it affects their food sources, it affects their water sources, it affects their traditional ways of life. And so we have to find ways to mitigate and seek to move forward in finding ways for those communities to adapt, but while we're helping them adapt, also take very concrete efforts to mitigate, or, I mean, if possible, roll back some of these effects. And the other thing I would say is, you know, obviously, the impacts of climate change on the Arctic communities and the peoples of the Arctic is first and foremost and front in mind. But climate change in the Arctic community, or in the Arctic ecosystem, affects the whole world, right?
Sure.
What's happening up there has climatic implications and reverberations over the planet. So there's sort of many reasons why very concrete efforts need to be taken there.
Both you and Louise talked about how intertwined our countries are, that it's not just economic, it's not just defense, it's people, it's culture, it's everything. I was just counting up. I've got 6 Canadians on my block here in Atlanta, including one in my house, by the way. So we're always talking about, I mean, we have neighbor issues. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about are neighbor issues, and they're very technical, very specific, and yet they're strategic at the same time. How do we take our relationship to the next level? How do we get there? What is this roadmap? What does that do? How do we improve what we're already doing?
I'm muted. So I think that we take our relationship to the next level based on this moment of time that we're in. I mean, we have just gone through, not just us and not just the United States, the globe. We have gone through, are still going through, and unfortunately in a very serious and difficult way, this global pandemic, a health crisis, an economic crisis, social crises that have derived from this economic and health crisis. So what does that mean for the Canada-US relationship? It means that it's a period of reflection. There's a lot that we've learned over the last 16 months about our vulnerabilities, about our resilience, about where we need to be more resilient, about who is there for us when the chips are down. And what I will say is Canada and the US were there for each other these last 16 months when the chips were down. We had thousands of Canadian healthcare workers going to Michigan and New York State and Washington State and other parts across the country every single day to care for US patients and then coming back home to Canada every night. We did that through the entire pandemic. We had a Canadian auto parts manufacturer that retooled to create ventilators that was having trouble sourcing specific tubes that are required for them early in the pandemic. And we mobilized suppliers in the US Southwest, to find where we could get these. And we were able to get ventilators into Canada at a time when we were incredibly short of ventilators. We had, as I said, our border for goods stayed open and very effective the whole time. We had the US, bring forward vaccines to Canada when we were lacking in supply. So this kind of integration and being there for each other in a time of need, I think merits not only gratitude, but it merits reflection. When other countries were really turned inwards, were really taking care of themselves, of course we were doing that too, but we were also taking care of each other. So what does that mean? It means in building resiliency, in learning from this moment in time, in figuring out where our vulnerabilities are, we should be looking at how together we can mitigate those vulnerabilities, how we can be stronger together. So we're doing supply chain resiliency studies together. We're looking at where it is that we don't necessarily have what we need, but together we can make it work. We are looking at the ways in which we can leverage our highly educated populations, our innovation, our drive, our natural resources to be at the forefront of a lot of the technologies that are going to be coming forward in energy transition, green technologies, battery technologies, electrification of vehicles. How can we position ourselves not only to do well for ourselves, but let's face it, let's outcompete the world. Let's outcompete everybody. Let's be the center of excellence for what is coming. We have all the tools to do it. We have all the intellectual tools to do it. We have all the workers to do it, and we've got the resources. So that's where I think we can push our relationship to the next level. Building on my sort of, we're an integrated platform, take that and supercharge it with a vision of where we're going as a globe and what's going to be needed in the future and how we can be best positioned to be at the forefront of that.
Wow, that's great. That's terrific. I've got a ton of great questions and not so much time. So let me ask them as quickly as I can. This is the point where short answers are welcome. Following up on what you just said, Ludovic Ortuno, who is the Georgia Department of Economic Development's representative in Canada. So he's promoting Georgia business in Canada. And he says both Canada and Georgia are taking major steps in favor of electric mobility. How do you foresee the future collaboration between Canada and the US and Georgia in particular, as well as their role in strengthening the North American electric vehicles supply chain? That's pretty specific.
That is very specific. It's great. So I'm going to speak, I don't know if I can speak to Georgia specifically. I will speak to this sector. So Canada has recently pledged to, by 2035, all light trucks and vehicles will be zero emitting. So we've set that as our objective, our goal, our plan, as a way to spurn forward, to push forward development in this sector. And we are very keen to do it with our U.S. partners, because our auto sector is deeply integrated, right? We have North American companies, but we also have the presence of non-North American companies in both of our countries, you know, Japanese, et cetera, European, that work between the two countries that develop and manufacture between the two countries. So I think that, and by the way, we also have in Canada a vast wealth of the resources, the critical minerals and the raw earth minerals that are required for battery technology, which has put us as the I'm going to say number 3, it might be number 4 battery manufacturer in the world, and the first outside of Asia, number 1 outside of Asia. So we have the resources, the know-how, and now some of the manufacturing capacity to really be at the forefront of that in partnership with the US. I think it's a huge area of opportunity that everybody should be paying attention to.
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions to ask about opening the border to people. And I know the US has announced a delay in allowing Canadians into the US. I mean, what's going on?
Okay, so let me take a step back. Excuse me. Let me take a step back. The first thing I'd like to say is that since we made the decision with Canada and the US to restrict non-essential travel between our two countries, we've had, which is like 16 months ago, we have had regular weekly, sometimes more than once a week, conversations with US border services, US experts, US scientists, US the people that are dealing with COVID on both sides of the border, to kind of compare notes and see things, how things are doing, and to manage this as best we can together. But right since the outset, you know, we weren't doing the same thing. Canadians have been, since the outset, able to fly into the United States, whereas when we adopted the policy, we applied it to both the land border and people coming to Canada by plane or boat. So people are talking a lot about how there's an asymmetry in where we are right now, but I think it's important to point out that there's never been symmetry, right? So we have always been making decisions that are dictated by our experts, our scientists on both sides of the border, listening to our own domestic advisors, in a way that where we seek to coordinate and share information as much as possible. So I say that because a lot of people have been saying, well, wait a minute, now we're out of sync. But it, you know, I think it's important to know that each country has always been making the decisions that make the most sense for it. For Canada, what I can say is that we are, you know, getting to a good place in terms of our vaccination rates. We have over 60% of Canadians that have 2 vaccines, and last time I checked, well above 75% that have 1. And based on the projections of our epidemiologists, by September, we're going to have 70 plus Canadians double vaccinated. And so Canada is going to, at that time, if we meet some of those targets, open up Canada to vaccinated travelers from around the world that have two vaccines plus 2 weeks. As an interim step, and recognizing that the Canada-US partnership is particularly special. We love all of our friends around the world, but we love you guys a little bit more. At least I say that as Canada's ambassador to the United States.
Of course, and it's true. It's basically true.
So we're phasing this in by opening up to Americans, fully vaccinated American citizens or permanent residents, but they have to be fully vaccinated. So that's the step we're taking, and it will take effect on August 9th. And I would say, just as a bit of a public service announcement, if you are thinking of traveling to Canada, you must use this digital platform that we're using in order to assess and verify vaccination status. It's called ArriveCan. Please be sure to use it.
ArriveCan. Okay, good. Here's an India question from Dr. Jagdish Sheth. He says, has the Indo-Canadian relationship grown as quickly and as strong as the U.S.-India relationship? And he's got a thing there about the Quad. I mean, this may be beyond your, obviously this is not part of what you do as Canadian ambassador to the U.S., but how, let me just ask you about India and Canada. I mean, you probably have, in population terms, a larger Indian population of Indian descent than the United States does.
Yeah, so I don't know the facts and figures. We certainly have a large Indian diaspora in Canada for sure, and we have a strong relationship with India through our bilateral relationship, through the Commonwealth. There's different ways in which we interact with India, and it is a very, very strong and important relationship. We have many members of the Canadian government who are of Indian heritage and have really important leadership roles in all components of our society in Canada. So very important relationship there, and a very important community for Canada. On the Quad, I would say, I think that it's really good, the work that is being done among the members of the Quad, and we're looking positively upon that, and we're interacting with every member of the Quad individually, but we do talk to them as a group as well. So that's all very positive.
Here's a question from Jim Reed. His company has plants both in the United States and in Canada, and he says the vaccination rates are stronger among his employees in Canada than in the US. To what do you attribute the relative vaccination success in Canada?
I think there could be a lot of different ways to explain that. I think that we have had, I think throughout the pandemic, an atmosphere in Canada where our head public health officials at the federal level, but across all of our provinces, have been put to the forefront by the governments, so by the governments of the provinces and by the governments of the federal government. And those individuals have learned to speak to Canadians in a very clear and concrete way about what's going on. I think that helped manage, the different times that we had to have lockdowns and we had to have restrictions. And I think it helped manage people's views around the vaccine. So I think putting the scientists and the experts out there and having them be the ones who talk to people is super important. And I think that has helped a lot. And I think Canadians are just not particularly, they're just a little less, they're just, I don't know, from the beginning, they've been keen to get vaccinated and lining up to get vaccinated, and that continues to be the case. So we're very happy about that.
I wish we had the same experience here. I'm concerned about taking too much of your time. If you have time for one more question, and it's on data privacy, which has become a huge issue, not just in our bilateral relationship, but worldwide. How does that affect U.S.-Canada trade? Does it? And how are our countries collaborating on data privacy?
Well, we have sort of individual domestic rules around data privacy, And for us in Canada, by the way, it's at the federal level, but it's also at the provincial level, depending on what the data is, and depending, like health information, for example, our health systems are run the sub-federal level, and so health information is under the control of provincial agencies. So we have a myriad of different rules around that, as does the US and other countries. I think the goal is always, just kind of going back to my earlier comment about international rulemaking, the goal is always to try and find some level of commonality that people can rely on, that they can feel safe about, understanding that there's always going to be some differences. So very active conversation, and it's always a tension, right? It's a tension between data freedom, information freedom, and individuals' needs for privacy, and that is probably going to be a perennial balancing act that we're all going to have to manage.
That's great. And Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, let me thank you so much. This has just been terrific. Lots of great information. Delighted to have you join us today. For our audience members, I've got 3 requests for you. Number 1 is join the World Affairs Council of Atlanta or your local World Affairs Council. You don't need to go to Aspen or Sun Valley or Davos to hang out with brilliant people like Ambassador Kirsten Hillman. All you need to do is join the World Affairs Council. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will put this conversation recording on our YouTube channel in about an hour. So if you're interested, please subscribe and you'll get a notification, and you can see our previous programs as well. We are looking for interns, and we're looking for digital interns, remote interns. You don't have to be in our office because we're not in our office. So if you know anybody looking for an internship in the fall, please contact us. I've got a great upcoming program on August 11th at noon on Putin's Russia with Dr. Fiona Hill, who's former Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs at the National Security Council, now a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. I want to thank the Consulate General of Canada in the Southeast and Invest Atlanta for underwriting today's program. Special thanks to Shante Infante and Sylvie Racine from the Consulate General here in Atlanta, Pam Lambo at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, Valerin Lopez DeFrank, our producer, Laura Brower, our social media specialist, and Henna Rennie, the Council's interim program director. And above all, I want to thank Ambassador Kirsten Hillman. This has been great. And I want to invite you to come to Atlanta in person. We would love to host you here. We had Ambassador McNaughton here. We've had former Governor General David Johnston here. We would love to have you and get a great time and a great audience for you. So please come to Atlanta this fall. How's that?
Thank you. I very much appreciate the invitation, and I'm sure I will make my way to Atlanta before too long. There's so much going on in Atlanta and in Georgia generally, so I look forward to it.
I'm going to take that as a yes and send you a date. Good. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, and thank everyone for joining this program.
Thanks, Ambassador. Bye-bye.
This has been great.